I was one of the few lucky ones to get my hands on the FX5 quite early, and I happened to have a commercial shoot in late August that I wanted to bring the FX5 instead of my Komodo. So I figured it's probably the best that I test the camera before I actually bring it to a professional working environment. So before I talk about the actual image quality, I want to dig deeper into how I test these cameras. So if you just want to see the results, you can click this timecode. First, I want to tell you why I wanted to compare the camera between the Arri Alexa Mini and then the Komodo. So for the Arri Alexa Mini, it has been an industry standard for almost 10 years. I think it's actually more than 10 years now. The sensor used in that camera, the LF3, is actually really good. It's got one of the best dynamic range. It's plenty sharp. It's very fast in terms of the sensor readout speed. They also use the same sensor on the Mini LF, the LF, and actually the 65, so you know how good that sensor is. The Mini serves as a great benchmark for this test. I wanted to do a test on the LF, but I was waiting for a clear summer afternoon, and I couldn't manage to get one in such short notice. As for the Red Komodo, it's my daily driver for the past 4 years. I have used this camera on many of my shooting projects. It's also got great image quality. It's a global shutter sensor, which I love. It's very small in package, almost the size of the FX5. And it's actually a little cheaper, on the secondhand market, but not by much. So I basically know that camera upside down. In terms of how I shoot the test, I would bring the cameras into a real world scenarios. I would shoot them under different lighting situation. I don't want to do any lab tests because other people already done that. And I would shoot them with the same settings. I will only change the shutter speed if I can. If I cannot, I will change the aperture. So everything across the camera stays the same. The aperture stays the same, shutter speed stays the same, ISO stays the same, white balance stays the same, although that doesn't matter that much. And then in post, I would match these three cameras through a linear 3x3 color matrix transformation. I don't want to judge these cameras based on how the manufacturer set them to look. I want to judge them objectively. It's not about the taste, it's about how these cameras document colors. And besides, color matching is a pretty standard industry pipeline, so I figured that this also serves a great purpose in showing whether the FX5 file can handle such a professional workflow. Now let's finally start to dig into how this camera performs. I have categorized this into 4 sections: image quality, codec quality, motion performance, and user experience. Image quality will showcase the sensor's performance from color, noise and resolution, dynamic range, and sampling errors, artifacts. Codecs will showcase side-by-side differences between XOCN and XAVC-SI. Dynamic range will cover dynamic range. Motion will cover how the sensor performs when the camera needs to move, such as rolling shutter and sensor jitter when IBIS is turned off. So let's start from what we care the most, image quality of the FX5. To demonstrate the performance as much as possible, I documented scenes from daylight, dusk, night, all with the exteriors and interiors. Shot with the Arri Alexa Mini, Komodo, and the FX5, I tried to film as much as possible, but it was a freaking hot summer afternoon, so I couldn't film all the things I want. I do welcome discussion, so I know what to improve on next time. After importing all the footages, I first tried to match the colors of the 3 cameras in linear working space. With great pleasure, I found that the color from the FX5 has greatly improved from its little brother, the FX3. One of the most exciting aspects is the FX5's ability to retain color information in dark scenes, especially during the dusk scene. We can see the FX5 has retained the bluish cast hidden in the shadow area from the dusk sky. When we cross-examine this from the Arri and the Komodo, we don't see much differences. Quickly browse through the footages, we can tell there aren't many noticeable mismatch, which is actually fantastic. I think the main reason that color performance excels from its little brothers is that Sony finally gave us the option to turn off in-camera noise reduction. It's such a little thing that they don't even advertise, but it changes so much. And to me, this option is what a Cinemaline FX named camera must have. Traditional in-camera noise reduction will greatly impact shadow area color rendition. When we switch this off, we can tell that the color rendition in both XOCN and XAVC have performed really well, actually pretty similar. I've been bitching about Sony's in-camera noise reduction that cannot be turned off. Now I'm finally satisfied. As to color improvements from raw recording, I don't see much from this rushed and simple test. As far as I know, all visible lights lies comfortably within the Rec 2020 range, except neon light, so a 10-bit log encoding shouldn't have much problem documenting accurate colors. To me, RAW is more about reducing sampling errors, which will require more rigorous testing. As to now, it looks pretty good, which is fantastic. Then we can dig into the noise and resolution performance. Although these are two aspects, they do interfere with each other, so I want to showcase these in the same segments. You know, a camera can have really high K count but have very noisy images, which will make the overall images look low res. Or a camera can have very low K count but excels at clean noise, which will look high res. You know, this is actually what the Alexa Mini is. It's only a 2.7K camera, but it's been looking good for almost 10 years. Let's start from a doxing. We can tell that when turning on DGO, which is dual gain output, the FX5's shadow area noise and color performs better than the Mini, and slightly better than the Komodo. But all three cameras have performed quite well. Then we go to a underexposure scene. We can tell that with DGO on, the FX5 is comfortably underexposed by 3 stops and have no significant color and detail degradation. After 4 stops underexposed, we can see some color shift and significant loss of details. Comparing to the Mini, it actually performs better. The Komodo doesn't lag much behind the FX5, which is also better than the Mini. I think the 2.7K resolution is Mini's biggest downside, but all in all 3 cameras have maintained shadow info pretty well. Just a side note, the internet likes to judge the GS sensor as a low dynamic range sensor. We can clearly showcase in this test that this is not the case. The Komodo actually performs extremely close or even better in some cases. After turning off DGO, the FX5 is no longer in the same tier with the Mini and the Komodo. It is really noisy and much details are lost. It is now back to the mirrorless camera tier, which is as expected. For resolution, the FX5 under 16:9 is a 5K camera. Mini is a 2.7K sensor upscaled to 4K. The Komodo is a native 6K GS sensor. When the information has not fallen into noisy area or in RAW, 3 cameras have performed a bit differently. Although there are 6 times different pixels, the 2.7K Mini and then the 6K Komodo doesn't have much difference in details. Some things the Mini performs better, some things the Komodo performs better. What is consistent is the FX5 performs the worst among the 3 cameras. When zoomed in 400%, we can clearly tell that in high frequency area, the FX5 looks blocky and details does not translate as well as the Mini and the Komodo. But do keep in mind that I am pixel peeping here. When not zoomed in, they all look similar from my 32-inch 4K OLED monitor. And normal people doesn't watch a movie zoomed in 400%. It's actually kind of stupid. I am guessing that the FX5 simply has a slightly worse sensor. It is rumored to use the same 10K sensor from the A7R6, so I think it's because of the pixel binning from 10K to 5K that the information is lost. And also we can see that as a 2.7K camera, Mini performs extremely well in detail. So we can safely say that the sensor's K count does not necessarily translate to detail. A 10K camera does not simply match a IMAX performance, and there are many other aspects that are also important to judge a camera's resolution performance. In terms of dynamic range, under gelled test, we can tell that in DGO mode, the FX5 performs almost on par with the Alexa Mini. On paper, this is a remarkable result. Alexa series has long been the king of dynamic range, holding 14 stops range when SNR is 2. This performance is about 2 stops ahead of other manufacturers, so how does this translate to a real-world performance? Let's begin by looking at some daylight shots. When we underexpose this camera, you can tell how well the FX5 performs in shadows, producing natural and clean shadow details. Then we move on to high contrast daylight interior. We can tell that the FX5 still performs the best in shadow area, followed closely by Komodo and Mini. In my overexposure test, the Mini wins at about a stop of highlight detail. You can tell from the bright part of the chair, the Alexa Mini still retains color and detail information. When combining this result with the shadow performance, we can tell that the 2 cameras are essentially neck on neck in terms of dynamic range. The difference is really how 2 manufacturers choose to distribute dynamic range information. Sony allocates a bit more in the shadow, Arri chooses the highlight. But since we can both shoot RAW and change in-camera distribution, you can very easily decide based on your shooting situation. This is when the EI setting comes in handy. If you are shooting RAW, I highly recommend you to try to learn how to expose based on the EI settings. But it's a very complicated topic, so I'm not going into too much detail about that. This is actually a great result, especially when you don't have much resources to light. When shooting at high contrast scenes such as a coffee shop, straight front gym with large windows, restaurants, we can now relax more at underexposing to keep the highlight info, while knowing that faces in the shadow are clean. This is essentially a cinematic quality, and Sony is democratizing such cinematic quality into everyday users' hand. Now we dig into the non-DGO performance. It looks bad, as expected. Performs about the same with the FX3, FX6, and other mirrorless cameras. So we need to either lose shadow to keep highlights, or clip highlights to keep shadows, resulting in a so-called mirrorless look. The FX3 is already one of the best camera in terms of dynamic range. Because the FX3 cannot turn off in-body noise reduction, I will also show a chart for the FX6 here. It is using the same exact sensor, but you can turn off in-body noise reduction. So I think this represents the data more accurately. And you can see that the FX5 has around the same dynamic range when SNR is 2 in non-DGO mode. In DGO, the FX5 has about 2.5 stops more. Sometimes you really just need that extra bit, and it just changes so much. With everything in mind, the FX5 is really like the rumors, a pocket-sized Venice. At least, when comparing to the Alexa Mini, it doesn't have noticeable difference in image quality. This is actually fantastic news. For its portable and complete body and controls, fast operation speed, and relatively low cost comparing to the competition, this is a fantastic camera to hold in hand and just document whatever you want. I like to travel a lot, so now I can relax more and knowing that without lighting, I can still film the location I go to with really high quality images. But all of this does not mean that FX5 is a perfect camera. In fact, there are some weird sampling errors, artifacts that I noticed during the test. And it is somewhat interesting in terms of how I triggered these artifacts. These artifacts including moire and the worst case are aliasing. To begin with, the FX5 comes with an OLPF filter, which is a filter that slightly softens the images so it doesn't produce moire. It is to my great surprise that I still managed to trigger moire noise in only one of the shots that I tested. Look at the colors on the lady's body. When she moves, this looks like a QR code in motion, like an animated QR code. But what's more funny is that I failed to reproduce this moire in side-by-side tests that I did. And there's one thing that's more interesting. Under very strange occasions, the camera can produce this weirdly looking aliasing. The object that caused this aliasing is not actually very fine detailed. Both are chairs with not so high frequency lines. I tried to reproduce this by shooting at a distant building and tiles on the rooftop. Both are really highly detailed. In DGO and non-DGO mode, I failed to reproduce these artifacts. I even tried to move the camera a bit, but I still have no results. To begin with, a camera with the internal OLPF shouldn't have such artifacts, and then I cannot reproduce these in high-frequency scenes, but in rather simple scenarios, I get these artifacts. I can only assume this is because of the pixel binning from 10K to 5K that causes these errors. I don't have too much knowledge in binning, so I welcome you guys to join the discussion. And then we move on to codecs. We are really just focusing on the XOCN vs XCVC-SI here. I just want to see how much of a difference does a RAW bring into here. And I want to see how will the XCVC-SI differentiate from the FX3. In daylight exterior, we can see huge color blockiness caused by high compression of the XCVC-SI codecs. When we film the tree leaves or even just the branches, we can see no details at all. Only color blocks remain. And look at this. Look at this wall. What is even this? A wall with pattern or a broken LED screen? I can see significant difference when not zooming in on my monitor. I know YouTube is going to compress them, but in theory, because the loss of info is so bad and so dramatic, you should be able to see this in 4K mode. Now look at this headshot of my girlfriend. When I look at this image on my screen, I try to switch back and forth between the RAW and XCVC. There is just something wrong with the XCVC footage. I guess that's what the internet people would call this a plastic look. When zoomed in, you can see the facial details have been blurred a bit, not in a pleasant way, and the color chart doesn't look as fine as the RAW version. Under nighttime, because the camera can turn off in-body noise reduction, we get much better colors. But the XCVC-SI images still have a little loss in color due to resampling, albeit very minor. Resolution at night actually isn't that bad. I guess due to the sensor's not so great ability to capture low light detail, it doesn't degrade that much from codec depression. It's just not sharp. When I try to pan them under different speed, both the XCVC-SI and XOCN performs quite well, as expected, since they are all essentially all intra-compression, meaning there is no group framing. Each frame is maintained in the file. Overall, we can see that when comparing between XOCN and XCVC-SI, there are huge differences. And I think this is the reason we can call this camera a cinema line camera, even a Cine Alta camera. XCVC-SI performs badly in high frequency details as expected. Even for documentary codecs, when we mostly shoot only headshots, it still looks worse on my monitor. I mean, I wouldn't spend almost $5,000 to buy this camera and shooting XAVC. It just doesn't make sense money-wise. Yes, underneath the XAVC codecs, there is much better contents because of the reasons mentioned before, but compression degrades these nice contents so much that making it look too plasticky. I think it's a waste of money if you buy this camera and shooting XAVC SI, especially if you're upgrading from a FX3, which doesn't lag that much behind. RAW is what you're paying the money for. And this section is where I find real-world tests make the most sense. We know how the camera would perform under lab tests, shooting charts and lines, but it is hard to correlate these results to real-world performance. It is just more straightforward to shoot an image with a bunch of trees and leaves and grass, so you know how the cameras and codecs performs. But that being said, lab test is very important to maintain consistency and set benchmarks. In the last part, where we talk about the image look, we dive into motion performance. Here I have a simple test of sensor jittering when shutting down IBIS. I've heard that many of the FPV users would send their FX3 for an IBIS lockup, because their sensor would jitter under extreme motions. I want to know if that part has improved, or if that part will have an impact on my personal use case. Here are the videos from Komodo and the FX5 mounted on the same platform, on the hood of my Golf GTI. The suspension of my car leans to the stiffer side, just an FYI. For this scene, I couldn't tell much of the difference. There are some slight yellow caused by FX5's rolling shutter because I'm too stupid to turn off the DZO mode. I guess I need to find an actual FPV expert to do this test. If you are going to need to shoot some FPV footage with this camera, I would recommend you to test it yourself. I just don't have the resources for now. I do know Sony is offering to remove the IBIS altogether as a service. They have not given a price or time, and it is also a one-way modification. Rolling shutter performance in real world is pretty nice. I did some speed pan with and without DGO. Here are the results. You do need to trade shadow information with sensor readout speed. I think it's fine when you need to quick pan. You probably don't need fine details to be clear. It's just all motion blur on the screen anyway. Finally, let's talk about the new UI. Sony has finally realized that the FX named camera should have FX level UI. So here we are. All the good things that are same from the FX6, so I won't go into details with this. I am very happy to finally have an accurate lot monitoring implementation. The lot function on the alpha menu cameras are somewhat inaccurate, and the color just looks off. Praises aside, I still have some problem with the FX level UI. First, I think the UI scale needs some tweaking when connecting through the HDMI port. This is in 4K and we can see the text are unnecessarily large and blocky. It basically just mirrors the UI from the LCD and it just doesn't look nice and clean, and it also just doesn't look professional. And more on the monitoring UI, we still don't have a way to quickly monitor the raw capturing signal, like the traffic light system on the red. It is nice to use false color, but sometimes I just want to know how much I am clipping highlights and shadows really quickly. We have internal RAWs now, we need an internal RAW pipeline tool. Then it comes to my biggest problem with the manual logic. Unlike the FX6, which you can shoot in one codec for every frame rate, FX5 will require you to switch between different codecs for different frame rates. It is understandable, but the way they implement this needs more work. To start with, you can't just change frame rate and be done. Frame rates from different systems, PAL, NTSA, whatever Sony decides, will require a reboot. Again, I'm fine with the reboot and codec change, I just need to know when I have to reboot. Jake from CVP actually made an Excel chart demonstrating which frame rate needs a reboot. This is some really helpful information, but come on Sony, do we really have to do this? I mean, this can be very simply solved by just changing the menu structure. You can put a sub-menu demonstrating each frame rate categorized into their own codecs, or you can just gray out the options that you cannot choose. It will show us the warning sign when we are trying to switch to a frame rate that needs a reboot. I mean, it's pretty simple. You guys already have that in your menu system. Overall, I think the FX5 is an excellent camera. I mean, I couldn't even believe that Sony is gonna put XOCN and DGO into such a small package. And I couldn't even believe, even after watching the reviews, I don't think the RAW in this camera is gonna be that good. Well, now after my hands-on test with this camera, and I'm glad to say that I am proved wrong. I am happy, extremely happy. I mean, we should all be happy that Sony actually built this camera. I would choose the FX5 over the FX3, no brainer. I would choose the FX5 over the FX6 because it has much better image quality. And I choose the FX5 even over the Red Komodo if I don't need that much resolution. Anyways, I will be bringing this camera as my A cam and my only camera in my upcoming shoot. and I will be sharing my experiences in terms of rigging and working with this camera in a professional and serious environment. Now, if you enjoyed this video and find the information helpful, please do me a favor by hitting the subscribe button and the like button. It means a lot to me. I mean, I wanted to do more videos about this because I'm really interested in discovering these aspects of the cameras, and I wanted to share. I wanted to get my hands on more cameras, and I wanted to make more videos. So thank you for watching till the end.